This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so let me put people on mute. Guys, please stay on mute if you're not, you do not have a question. Thank you. All right, so yes, anyone, any questions before I get started? Any questions still here that I can take? So we were doing the very basics on, let's say, the Friday. We were telling things like what is an Azure tenant and how do you create something called as an Azure tenant, and we represent an Azure tenant by using this particular diagram. Again, an Azure tenant, right, is nothing but a space. It's like your own account that you create with the Azure cloud. So when you want to use the Azure cloud, you go ahead, create something called as an Azure tenant. And how do you create an Azure tenant? You just go onto a website called portal.azure.com. This is where you go to, and this is the login page for the Azure cloud. And in here, it's asking you for, to give you your email or a phone number or the Skype ID. You can go ahead, give your email ID. Again, the question here is that is there a specific email ID? Not really. You can have a Gmail or you can have an Outlook, a pre-existing account, and integrate it with something known as portal.azure.com out here. And as in when you go ahead and register yourself, again, how do we register? We just go ahead, if you have a Gmail, just put your Gmail in here. It will send you an OTP to your Gmail account. Take that OTP, copy it, paste it here, and you are going to get something called as an Azure tenant out here. So as in when you log in, the first page that you see is going to look something like this. So it's going to tell Azure, and it's going to tell something like this. And in in, let's say, in the right hand corner, you will have your email ID and you'll have all these things out here. And it's going to tell you that this is your Azure account. And in order to, or whenever you create something called as an Azure tenant, Azure is going to give you something called as a tenant ID. Is going to give you something known as a tenant ID out here. And the tenant ID is a unique alphanumeric, let's say, character, meaning it's a combination of numbers and letters out here, which is unique to your account. Every time you create a new account, you are going to get something called as a new tenant out here. So if I go into something called as Azure Active Directory, which we will talk about in great detail today on what Active Directory really is. If you just click on this, you are going to get an information called as what? A tenant ID. It's a unique ID that you get every time you register or whenever you register with Microsoft Azure. It looks something like this. In my case, the ID looks something like this. In your case, when you go and register with your own account, the ID will change. The ID has to change out here. So tenant is nothing but a directory, or it's nothing but, let's say, a space where you can go ahead and create, let's say, or when you can where you can go ahead and, let's say, start using your Azure resources. You can go ahead and start your journey with Azure out here as such. One more thing we discussed is that if you have a tenant, is that sufficient? No, not really. You need to also have a subscription inside Azure. So you need to subscribe towards the services of Azure. That's where Azure subscriptions comes into picture. Subscriptions. And for you to create a subscription, you need to have a pre-existing tenant. You need to have at least one tenant out here. And how do you create a subscription? Just search for something known as subscriptions out here. And in my case, I already have a subscription. In your case, when you start your journey, it'll say there are no subscriptions. Please go ahead and add one. You can say add, and let me do one thing. Let me switch the directory into a different one so that I can show you how to just add the subscription out here. So you can say subscriptions. You can say add a particular subscription out here, and it's now checking your eligibility. It's telling you what kind of subscriptions are you really eligible for, and can you go ahead and create a subscription out here, and so on and so forth. So let's give it a minute and tell me, or it now tells me that, you know what, These are the number of subscriptions that are available for you for your particular account. And it's telling me free trial, I'm not eligible. Reason being, free trial is only once per a tenant. A type of a subscription called free trial is only once per a particular tenant. And when you register for free trial, when you in your case you will have this button in a blue color highlighted. When you click on select offer, it'll tell you, okay, fine, I'll sign you up for Azure, and it's going to ask you details like what is your name, what is your phone number, what is your email address, and very importantly, credit card information. And when you create a free trial, the initial charge is going to be 2 rupees to make sure that the credit card is activated or not. And once Azure verifies this, Azure will give you a free trial subscription. So in my case, if I click on subscriptions, you're able to see something called Azure classes, right? In your case, instead of Azure classes, you will have free trial, and each and every subscription will have its own subscription ID. Again, a unique alphanumeric number. It's going to tell you what is your role. We'll talk about that. And then the status. Is the subscription active or not out here as such? So you have a tenant. Tenant is represented by a tenant ID. You have a subscription, and subscription has something called as what? A subscription ID out here. And one more thing that we were telling is that, can I have multiple subscriptions under the same tenant? Yes. And why do we need multiple subscriptions under the same tenant? We were talking about a use case scenario wherein you can have one company called Tata, and Tata can be your tenant. And you can have multiple companies working under Tata, like Tata Motors, Steel, Finance. You have a lot of things out here, right? Each and every company can have its own subscription out here. Something like Tata Motors will have its own subscription. Tata Steel can have its own subscription. And then you have Tata Finance, which can have its own subscription, which means employees related to one particular company. Let's say I am an employee who belongs to a company called Tata Motors. I, as an employee, should only have the access to log inside this particular subscription, and not the Tata Steel and not the Tata Finance. This applies vice versa as well. So multiple subscriptions give you a watertight separation. It's not only multiple companies out here. You can also imagine just one simple company, multiple departments inside the company, each and every department having their own subscription out here. So subscription, having multiple subscriptions, just gives you a watertight separation. And is there any limit to have, let's say, multiple subscriptions? No, there is no limit, provided you are not creating multiple free trials. Free trial is only one. But if you go for multiple things like pay as you go, you can have multiple pay as you go subscriptions under the same tenant out here as such. So these are a couple of concepts that we were discussing. So any questions that I can take till here before we go ahead and get started with today's session? Anyone? Any questions till here? Let's look at the chat window. Okay. Oh, sure. Fine. Let's get started then. So very firstly, I'll start introducing, or I'll start telling that if I want to log into Azure portal, I have to go into this particular link called portal.azure.com. As in, when I'm here, I'll give my ID telling classes Azure Devops, and this is @gmail.com. So I'll put @gmail.com. Now, when you are working for a company, instead of having @gmail.com, you might be having the name of the company, like @accenture.com, @tata.com, or whichever company that you're working for. You'll have the ID in that way. And I'll say next. See, as and when I do a next here, it's asking me to enter the password. It is telling, okay, fine, please go ahead, enter the password out here. And I'll just go ahead, enter the password of my account. Asking, you want to stay signed in? I'll say no. and it is telling me you have something called as a multi-factor authentication, which means that after entering you also have to go ahead and give your, let's say, OTP that I'll send to your email ID. So I'll just go ahead, I'll say give the OTP, and what it does is that if I check my email right now, I should be getting a code from Microsoft telling this is a security code. Please go ahead, enter this out. So I'll just go ahead and enter this out here and say verify. And finally, I have come into the portal.azure.com out here as such. Now, very importantly, how did Microsoft know that my account called classes Azure DevOps at the rate gmail.com? So this is the account that I use to log into portal.azure.com. So the very important question that I have is that by entering this email ID, how will Microsoft know that I have a subscription or I have a tenant and which tenant I belong to? Because see, there are multiple Azure account tenants, or there are multiple tenants that multiple organizations have created. Let's say you're working for one organizations, they are like 10,000, or let's say even more than 10,000 organizations which created a tenant with Azure out here as such. Now, Azure firstly has to do one thing. It has to identify which tenant ID you belong to, which tenant your account actually belongs to out here. For which, very importantly, for you to log inside Azure, the entire point is that for you to log inside Azure, this email ID called classes Azure DevOps at the rate gmail.com should be a part of a tenant. It can be part of multiple tenants as well. One ID can be a part of multiple tenants as well. But for you to go ahead and do what I did, like telling that, okay, fine, classes Azure DevOps, something like that, I logged in on all that stuff. For this, or for this account to be a part, or for this account to log in, it has to be a part of at least one tenant out here. Let's say you take a different ID which is non-existing. Let's say I just go ahead and say this is Azure DevOps. I'll give a wrong ID out here, okay? 123 456 something like this at the rate gmail.com. Now I'm not sure if this is a part of any other tenant out here, so I'll say next. What is it telling you right now? We couldn't find an account with this particular username. Try another or get an account out here. Which means if you have to log inside portal.azure.com, either you have to create an account or your account already has to be a part of a particular tenant. I'm able to log in because my account is a part of a tenant. And how do I know that? Let's go there. Let me give it one quick second out here, and let me go inside my account. And in order to check, yes, in order to check this, I will go into something called as an Azure Active Directory out here. Again, we have come back to something called as Azure Active Directory. And earlier we came here to just look at what is my tenant ID out here. Now just imagine that Azure Active Directory is like a book which contains all the usernames and all the passwords in the background which can have access to your Azure tenant. Which means if a user wants to access your account, he has to be a part of your Azure Active Directory. Very simple. So Azure Active Directory is like a backend database which checks whether, or which checks which tenant are you a part of, or which tenant ID are you really a part of out here. And for a user to log in with an account, he has to be a part of this particular Active Directory. He or she has to be a part here. So if I go into my Active Directory, in the left hand side under manage, I have something called what? Users. If I click here, do you see there is a user called classes Azure DevOps? There's a user called classes Azure DevOps at the rate gmail.com, and this user has its own password and all these things. The reason I'm able to log in is because I'm a part of the Active Directory out here. And let's say that you want to add one more user out here. Let's say you want to add one more user into your Azure Active Directory tenant, meaning you are working here, you're already a backend user, you're working here. Let's say a new developer in your organization has joined. So a new developer or a new QA, whoever is joined, they want to now go ahead and log in inside Azure portal. So what you do is that you say, okay, fine, you know what? If you want to log inside my Azure portal, I will go ahead into something called users. And now the thumb rule here is that the user has to be a part of this particular directory. So what I'll say new user, and there are two different options: create user and what? Invite an external user out here. We will start with create user. We'll see what happens here. I'll say create user, and here it's telling create user in your organization, and it's asking me what is the name of the user. I'll say the user is called demo user one. Okay, I'm creating one user called demo user. And do you see what is happening as in when I give something called demo user out here? It's telling demo user at the rate something. It's called a directory ID out here as such. So if I go back into my Active Directory, I have a tenant ID. I also have something called what? A primary domain, which is dot on Microsoft dot com. It's telling you have a primary domain which is called on Microsoft.com, and this domain changes with the tenant. So for example, I have another tenant out here, so I'll say switch directory. And if I go into a different organization, now I have a different organization, and if I go in here, do you see what is the primary domain right now that I have? Classes Azure Devops gmail.com dot on Microsoft. Let's say dot on Microsoft.com out here, which means that this is now my primary domain ID out here as such. Primary domain, which means any user that I create, let's say it is user one or demo user one, will have an ID called user one at the rate classes Azure DevOps dot on Microsoft.com. Now, what organizations do is that this is the domain what Microsoft gives you. You can take your own domain, your company domain. For example, you have a domain name called tata.com. You can take that domain, you can put it here. You can map it here by using something called as custom domains inside the Azure Active Directory. There is something called as custom domains. You have something called custom domain names. You can go ahead, add your own custom domains. For example, in my case, I have something called my Azure trainings.xyz. I have, let's say, one here. You can add multiple things out here telling a custom domain out here as such. You can add something like tata.com, provided this domain is, provided you own this domain. So once you add it, the domain owner will get an email telling that, you know what, can you use this domain here? They'll say yes, and once that you do, it will be added and it will be verified. So what you can do is that when you go ahead, add a user into your Azure account. Let's say I want to add a user. I'll say add user. I'll say create a user. And while I'm creating a user, it's asking me what is the name of the user out here. I'll say it is demo user one. And now I have an option to add the user either to classes Azure DevOps at the rate gmail.com or classes Azure DevOps gmail.on Microsoft.com, or can add the user to what? Classes Azure DevOps at the rate my Azure trainings.xyz. Which means that if I have tata.com, I can also do demo user one at the rate tata.com. That will become your user ID. That's how users are added. In place of demo user one, it will be your name. Something like, Krishna at the rate tata.com. Using that ID, you can go ahead and log inside the Azure portal out here as such. Good, please. Correct. Once you join the company, company will give the mail ID. Yes. 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 Based on the email ID, you'll add, let's say, yourself into the tenant out here. So initially you will get an email. That email will be added here. Yes. Any more questions till here? So I'll just switch my domain back to classes Azure Devops at the rate on Microsoft.com. As it is demo user one, and I can say that the name of the user is demo user one here. I can give the first name. I'll say this is demo. I'll say give the last name. It is user. I can go ahead and say auto generate a password, or I'll go ahead and create my own password for this particular user. I can say okay, fine. I'll give some password here, and I can go ahead and I can, let's say, do things like do I want to block the sign in of this user? Is it yes or no? And also, do I want to restrict this user from one particular location? Meaning, can I tell that the user should only be logging in from India or only be logging in from US, or where I can also do a location privilege out here. I can give a job title, department, and all these things optional in nature, and I can go ahead and create the user out here as such. Do you see the user got successfully created? I'll just refresh this for a couple of times, and now I have what? Demo user with an ID called what? Demo user at the rate whatever is my primary domain. Where is my primary domain again? If I go here in the OU page, I have what? A primary domain ID. So demo user is now getting what? Demo user at the rate something like this. Your primary domain can also be tata.com, accenture.com, whatever it is. Depending upon that, you can go ahead and add your users out here as such. So demo user one is added. Now, if I want to log in as this user, I'll just copy the ID. Okay. Now, as and when you create a user here, what your company does is that this is a new user, let's say something called demo user one and something. They'll go ahead, send him across an email telling that, you know what, this is your email ID, this is your initial password that I created with all those details, all the login information out here. So you get the all the login information, and I'll go into an incognito window. Let me close this. In order to log in, let's say with a different user out here, I can either say, sign in with a different account. Again, it will create a little conflict. So what I'll do is I'll click on these three dots. I'll say new incognito window without the history and everything. I'll say portal.azure.com, and I'll give the ID here called what? Demo user at the rate whatever is your primary domain. Now this user is a part of your tenant right now. This user is a part of your tenant, which means this user is present in your Azure Active Directory. So this user should be ideally able to log inside the same tenant like you are doing. So I am logged in to a tenant with an ID called what? 140 something like this. So what I can do right now is with using this particular user, I'll say next, and Microsoft is identifying that yes, you belong to a tenant. Now please go ahead and give me the password that you received in the email. So you, as an administrator, I went ahead, I sent you the password. Now this is asking me to go ahead and log in with that particular password out here. So what I'll do is I'll give the password that I received. And as and when you give the password, it's now telling you, okay, fine, you know what, update the password because this is something that you have not set. Please go ahead and update it. I'll go ahead and update the password out here real quick. And I'll say sign in into this particular account. So I am now signing inside this particular account. And now it's going to ask me, do you want to protect and all these things? I'll just say skip for, let's say, 14 days. I'll say no. And I am now logging inside the Azure portal out here with an ID called what? Demo user one at the rate something. And if I look into my Azure Active Directory, I'm logged into the same tenant ID, the same primary domain. I have the same primary domain, same, let's say, tenant ID out here, like my administrator's account. Just a second, let me see if I have any questions I can take. Okay. Okay. So I have now something called classes Azure DevOps at the rate, let's say something. I've logged in with something called what? Demo user one into the same tenant, which means you have two users out here. One is the administrator user who added you, and you who have been added. Both will log inside the same tenant.
Uh,
Both of y'all will
I
be
have a
logging
question.
inside. Just a second, let me complete and I'll take your question. So both will be logging inside the same tenant out here, which means that if I go here in my normal Google Chrome browser, this is my account called Azure DevOps, classes Azure DevOps out here. I am also logged in with this particular tenant ID, same let's say domain out here, and the user that I added, who's demo user, he's also logged in with the same thing, which means you can have multiple users logged into the same directory. How many users can you add? No limit. You can have any number of users logged in, which means all your employees, right? Each and every of your employee will get each and every, let's say, unique email ID out here. Using that, they'll go ahead and log in. That's how you can maintain a separation between the logins out here. Yes, I can now take questions. Please go ahead.
The user that you created is for the console login, right?
User that I created is for what? Sorry, can you come again, please?
Console login. I mean, to
Uh,
log into the console,
Console login.
isn't it?
Log into the portal, not console. Log into the portal. Yes, I have
Log into
created
the
a user
portal.
to log into the portal. Yes.
Okay. So if the user is a developer who wants to access through APIs, can the user
Okay.
do it, or do we need to add roles to that user?
Good question. Can a user wants to, let's say, access APIs? Very firstly,
Yeah.
where would the API really be in? Very firstly, you'll have to come from the subscription level out here. So very important, you'll have to follow this particular hierarchy, which is let's say your tenant, your subscription, and under your subscription, resources are going to be here. So I'll talk about that. Yes, but to give you a very brief answer, the user needs to have a particular role. The user cannot just go ahead and start working on your subscription. They need to have a particular role out here as such.
Okay. So the user by default will have access to the portal, right? I mean, he doesn't have, while you are creating, he doesn't have access to the APIs,
No, he
which
won't.
means programmatical access he doesn't have.
He will not even have a read access.
What access he will have by default?
He will have no access at all. He'll just be able to see what I'm able to see right now. Is the default
Okay.
directory. No access. He's a part of your tenant. That's it. He's just a part of your organization without any access out here as such.
Okay. And so far we have not created you. So far we have not created a group and added the user, right? We will do that later.
We will do that. We will see what is a group, how do you add the users and all these
Hmm.
things out here.
Okay. So this is my first class. I mean, probably tenant and subscription. I think all you covered it. I mean, I need to go through the users.
Yes, please. So I
Okay.
was
Thank
just,
you.
let's say, doing a revision of what is tenant and subscriptions. Again, we did not cover a lot. We just defined a couple of things. But this would be, let's say, one major class out here that I would say on how do you do a user addition and so on and so forth. Is any more questions here? Sorry, I'll take one question. Yes, please go. This is the end user role. When you say end user, what do you exactly mean? Okay. So you are the employee, I am the admin. I created you. Yes. No, you are not an end user. You are an employee of the company. End user is your client. End user can be your client. You are an employee of the company. You are expected to work on the Azure portal. So what is your role? We'll talk about that. What is or what kind of a role you have? We'll talk about those things out here as such. Yes. Any more
Yeah,
questions here? Mhm.
Kiran, yeah, number of users creation is based on like a subscription, or we can create a number of users with any subscription.
No, it is not based on based on the subscription. You can create any number of users inside your Azure Active Directory. As of now, I have three users here. One is, let's say, Azure DevOps myself, and then a demo user, and then let's say I've added one more user out there as such. So I have three users. and the number of users is not based upon a subscription.
Hello, sir.
Azure Active Directory is the same as an normal Active Directory, is it? With all the inheritance and uh,
Inheritance and all these things, yes, exactly. But Azure Active Directory is something which is hosted on the cloud. The normal Windows
yeah.
Active Directory is something which is on premise. Azure Active Directory is hosted on the cloud, and yes, it will follow all the inheritance of, let's say, the or Windows Active Directory out here as such.
So the domain is coming. I mean, we have created the domain first before adding the user in Azure Active
Uh,
Directory.
so, so the thing here is that I did not create a domain. I was assigned a domain depending upon my ID. So this account went ahead and created a particular Azure tenant. So I registered myself with Azure. As in when I registered myself with Azure, I got assigned a domain out here. So that was a first step. And now I'm adding users to that particular domain. Now you can go ahead
Okay.
create your own domains again. Yes, you can go ahead attach your own custom domains out here into your Active Directory as such.
Okay, you can create a domain, I mean, which should be unique, right, across.
Yes, which should be unique across. That's true.
The public domain, which means, I mean, the DNS should be public IP and it should be
Yes,
unique, or an
yes, that's
internal.
correct.
In Active Directory, traditional Active Directory, we can create a private domains, right? So
That's true.
similarly, can we do that here?
Here you cannot do a private domain. Reason being this is a public cloud. So you have to have, let's say, a public domain out here as such.
So which means we can have only one domain across
You can have
multiple
multiple
accounts.
domains. You can have multiple domains out here. Again, you can add multiple domains out here. In this case, I have multiple domains. You can have you can add one more domain as such, and you can
So
add
all
users specific to that
okay.
particular domain.
So all these domains will have a public IP, static public IP, right?
All these domains will have a static public IP. Yes, depending
Let's say
upon,
I
let's
have
say. Mhm.
let's say I have one primary domain and child domains,
Okay,
subdomains.
okay,
I need to have uh, let's say I have more than one domain
okay,
and
okay.
subdomains.
Hmm.
Do I need to have those many public addresses resolving to, I mean, DNS
Again,
IP, so
uh,
should be public
to just
IPs.
stop you there, DNS resolution is something that I'm not taking care of this point. DNS resolution is taken care by my cloud provider. So unlike a traditional, let's say, Active Directory where you need to have, let's say, a public IP out here, getting result to a
Mm.
public IP and so on and so forth. I'm
Okay.
not doing that. I'm just adding a domain and I'm verifying my domain. I'm telling what is my domain verification. That's it. The IP
So,
resolution is taken care by my platform.
so if I create 10 domains, so 10 IP
Hmm.
addresses will be taken care by Azure AD,
That's correct. The platform will take care of it.
and that will be charged, right? I think to the account.
That will be charged. Yes. That is a chargeable service. Yes.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Sir.
Yes. So coming back here, so I now have two users, right, who are logged in. One is called
Hello,
Classes
sir.
Azure Devops. Uh,
Hello,
Go ahead, Venkatesh.
sir. Is this the process of working when we go into the company? Is total whatever we are learning.
See, these are the initial basics that we are talking about. Uh, this is completely the role of an administrator. Adding users, deleting users is completely the role of an administrator. Now we'll
Okay.
talk about what are our roles come into picture when we start resources. When we start something called as resource creation, we'll talk about what our role comes into picture out here as such.
Okay. Yeah. When we go into the company, we are going to working in the portal, this Azure portal.com.
Yes, we will be working in portal.azure.com. Yes.
Okay. Okay, sir.
So
Uh,
you are also showing how to create a
Between
private domain,
Windows
right?
AD and Azure AD.
Just a second. I'll take one question at a time. Go ahead, please.
I was asking, do you also
Mhm.
show how to create a private domain and associate user to that domain, or
See, again, that's what I was telling is that you will not be able to create a private domain in a public cloud. See, this is a public cloud out here. You won't be able to do a private domain as such. See, this is a public cloud, which means that you will have to, let's say, force yourself to go into something called portal.azure.com. And once you go
okay,
into portal.azure.com, you will have to give some of the other domain out here, right? that is publicly accessible, which means that you as a user have to have an internet connection or an intranet connection to go ahead and access it out here as such.
Right. In that case, I mean, if I create users,
Hmm.
my existing users in my private domain on my domain
Okay.
controllers, all these
Hmm.
users can be mapped here.
That's correct. All these users can be mapped here as such.
I mean, are we seeing that domain or demo as well?
No, we are not doing that because that is a pure administration for the Active Directory role out here. So I'm not going that direction. I'm going inside the cloud and administration of the resources out here as such.
Okay. Can you share some resources aligned to that, please?
Sure, definitely. I'll send across documentation links, but if you can just send me a question to classesassuredevops@gmail.com. This is the ID. If you can
Okay.
send this particular question, I'll reply back with the links, the proper links that you can read through.
Right. So because in real world, I mean, that is what we do, right? All the identity access management will be managed from the private domain controllers will be mapped to the public domain, public.
Correct. Again,
Right.
that's true. We will in the real world do that, but it's not we as DevOps engineers who do that. It's not our role as a DevOps engineer to do that. It's the role of an administrator to do that. So that's the reason the focus of this particular section is not to go inside the Active Directory. So that's what I was telling in right in the beginning sessions. Is that my
No, no.
focus is
I
not
was,
completely on the AD. Go ahead, please.
yeah, I was assuming we are covering Azure admin as well as the DevOps, right, as a course.
Azure admin related to the DevOps, Azure admin, whichever
Awesome.
that, I mean, whichever part of the Azure administration that supports your, let's say, DevOps out here. Because the reason being,
Mhm.
again, see, it's a time bound course, right? I have to cover it in, let's say, about 75 sessions out here, which means, but
Okay.
my heavy focus should be on DevOps because tomorrow or later when you go to the organization, you'll be starting to work on CI/CD pipelines or Azure DevOps tools out here. That will be the main focus that you'll be working on. So that's the reason my main focus is on that particular section of it. Now, if you do the Azure Active Directory, right, that will itself take around 80 sessions. Azure Active Directory is that vast. It'll have, let's say, about 80 to 90 sessions out here for directory out there. So that's the reason I'm just covering the basics of directory and then going into the administration syllabus. What is required for you as a DevOps engineer out here as such?
Okay. Yeah. No problem. Thanks.
One small query.
Good, please.
I'm a part of a primary domain. I have a
Okay.
subdomains. Can I log
Okay.
in through subdomains?
You will not be able to. You have to be
Okay.
a part of your subdomain out here. So you'll have to be a part of one particular domain. So I can add the same user as a part of two different domains out here. Then you'll be able to log in with that particular domain ID out here as such. So very
Okay.
importantly, yeah, good, please.
Inheritance is not possible through primary domain to subdomains.
No, inheritance is not possible. Meaning, the question here is that if I add a user to this particular domain, will the user be, will the user be automatically added to a different domain like Tata.com? No, it cannot be possible. You will have to, let's say, add the user specifically to a particular domain.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Any more questions, guys? So this is what I'm now trying to tell is that
Kiran, what is the
let me
difference between Windows AD and Azure AD?
Windows AD and Azure AD. Again, Azure Active Directory is this is something that you see, which is hosted on the cloud, which means the Azure Active Directory that you see is maintained and controlled by someone called Microsoft. In the background, they control it. It's a platform control directory, which means the amount of control that you do at your end is very limited. You can go and add users, subtract users, add roles to the users, and all these things. When you talk about a Windows directory, which means that you have purchased your own servers, these are called on-premise servers, like my machine. It's called as an on-premise machine, and on top of that machine, you go and add users. In that case, you can go ahead and do your private domains and all these things out here as such. So, cloud versus local machine. You can think about that as a difference between a Windows directory and an Azure Active Directory out here as such.
Satya. Hello.
Okay, I'll have to park the questions right now. I'll have to move forward. So
Okay.
I'll park a couple of questions and I'll take it at the end. Just give me like 5 minutes and I'll take those
Okay.
questions out here.
Sure.
Okay. So the point is this: you have two accounts right now that you're seeing. One is classes Azure DevOps. The other is demo user one. We have added two things into the same tenant, and both of the users are able to see this, or are able to see this, called primary domain as classes Azure DevOps, and also the tenant ID starting with 140. Even this user is able to see the same thing out here. But what is the primary difference here? Let's see. I'll go to home, and if I want to check the subscriptions that are there as a part of this particular user called classes Azure DevOps, who's an administrator, I'll say subscriptions. Now I am able to see a subscription called what? Azure classes. I have a subscription with a particular subscription ID called Azure classes out here with this particular ID out here. Now my question is, guys, this user is able to see a subscription under a tenant. I'm able to, let's just see the subscription. Will this user uh, or should this user also be able to see the same subscription? Yes, no? What do you all feel? I've added the user as a part of the tenant, and subscription comes under a tenant, right? Subscriptions come under a tenant out here. So my question is that if this user is able to see their subscription, I'm able to see the subscription by using something called what? Classes Azure DevOps at gmail.com. I'm able to see this particular subscription called Azure classes. I'm able to see the subscription ID and all that stuff. I, as classes Azure DevOps at gmail.com, who's an administrator, went ahead added another user called demo user one. Now my question is that do you think that the demo user one will also be able to see the subscription?
By default, no, we have to provide access to that
Okay.
subscription.
By
Absolutely.
default, no, we have to provide access to the subscription. Okay, good answer. Anyone else who thinks yes, he'll be able to see it, or no, he won't be able to see it?
Yes, right.
So let's look at that. Let's not take guesses. Let's look at that. So I'll go as demo user one. As demo user one, I'll go ahead and say search for subscriptions. It's telling, what is it telling right now? Your current access does not include to see any permissions to the subscription, which means adding users to your Azure Active Directory will only give them access to the portal. They won't be able to get access to the subscription. You will have to add users to your subscriptions out here. You will have to specifically add users to your subscriptions. And if you do that, this is called as RBAC, role based access control, which means that Azure now allows you to declare a role to a particular user, telling that is the user a, is the user an administrator? Is he a contributor? Is he a reader? Or is he something else? Using these roles, you'll now be able to administer, or you'll now be able to control what a specific employee does. Meaning, can he delete something? Can he create something? Can he invite other users? Or what kind of a specific role that one gets? And we'll go into the role based access controls. We'll look at what are role based access controls out here. But for today, what I want you all to do is just try adding multiple users inside this, not just one, but multiple users. Just go into the Active Directory, say users, say new user, create user, go inside this, say invite, create user out here, say the username is user2, and fill up these details, add it out. See how you basically, kind of, let's say, can add users. And one very important question that I want you all to focus on is that as of now, I am manually adding the users, right? Let's say in your organization, you have 10,000 users. You want to add them. Can I, for each and every user, go ahead, say, create user and add them? It's very difficult, right? Can you see in any of these options, can you go ahead, do something called as a bulk operation? Can you just read about that? Just read about it. We'll talk about it in the coming session out there on how do you do something called as bulk addition or bulk removal and all these things out here as such. But as of today, I just want you all to understand what is the difference between a tenant and what is a subscription. How do you just go ahead and add a user into let's say your Azure tenant out here, and once he is added, how can a user go ahead and log inside it, or how can basically a user go ahead log inside it? That's the only thing that I expect out here as such. But I can now take questions. Let me see. I have a couple of questions in the chat. Primary domain is created and maintained by. Primary domain is created by us when you go ahead and register with Azure, maintained by, let's say, Microsoft in the background. Yes. Any questions still here that I can take?
The users which we are creating in Azure portal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
these users are primarily to manage. I mean, like administrator will add these users, and users will navigate through the portal, or let's say have applications like SaaS based applications, right? So these
Mm-hmm.
applications
Mm-hmm.
also require authentication through the Azure Active Directory. How do we do that?
It depends upon what you are trying to really access. Usually, when you add a person, or usually when you add someone and give them a role, very importantly, it depends upon what kind of a role that you're giving, for which we need to look into something called role based access control.
Yeah.
What kind of a role that you're really giving, and depending upon the role, this defines what access a user normally does have. But normally, when you go ahead, add a user to your subscription and give them a role, all the applications that are running inside your subscription, all the applications that are hosted inside your subscription, can be accessed by that particular user depending upon the role he has.
No, no. My question is different actually. See, the users what where we add in the
Hmm.
on-premise Active Directory, those are LDAP
Hmm.
based, right? So
Okay.
the users who are to get authenticated from other applications outside
Hmm.
Azure Active Directory or outside my organization, let's say SaaS
Okay.
applications where I'm trying to integrate, right? So
Okay.
those need to be authenticated and authorized, right?
They
So
have to be.
the
That's correct.
difference
They have
here,
to be. Mhm.
yeah, what's the difference LDAP user and as well as the outside user to get authenticated?
See, when you're talking about an external user from a, let's say, SaaS based application, again, it will become a little confusion if I go ahead and introduce a topic. It will confuse a lot of people if I go ahead and, let's say, talk about that particular topic out here. But to just give you a very brief overview, if you are using a SaaS based application, which is an external application, that application needs access to the Azure Active Directory. It has to firstly
Yeah.
authenticate with your Azure Active Directory based upon something called app registrations, which means that
Sorry,
that particular app,
based on what?
based on something called as app registration, app registration, sir.
Okay.
That application
Okay.
has to generate something called as a JWT token, then authenticate
Hmm.
itself, and then go ahead and, let's say, log inside the Azure portal out here as such.
Okay.
Again, see, if I go to technicality in the first class,
Yeah,
it will
yeah, I
become
got it. I
very,
got it.
very difficult to
I
people.
got it.
So I'm
I
limiting
got it. I
things out
mean,
on what I can really cover out there.
if you are covering in the future classes, I mean that should be great.
In the future classes, yes, we do have SaaS based applications which needs access to your Azure portal. So yes, this is all something that I'll do cover in the future classes out here as such. Yes, any more questions here, guys?
Hello, sir.
Good, please.
Sir, previous you see picture, sir.
Hmm.
Uh,
This one you see.
uh, this is one subscription.
Okay.
Classes Azure Devops is the admin. Huh?
Yes, classes Azure DevOps is the admin account that I have. So using this, I'm able to perform all these things out here as such.
Okay, this subscription only Azure classes Azure Devops subscription. Admin.
Not really. Not really. The subscription can be shared amongst users. The same subscription can be shared amongst users, for which you need to add the user at the subscription level as well.
Okay.
So yes, it's not only for classes Azure DevOps, not only for the admin. The subscription can be shared amongst the users as well as such.
Kiran,
Okay.
sama subscription. Hello.
Go ahead, please. Your voice is a little low, but yes, audible. Please go ahead.
Okay, please wait. Actually, you already open a subscription called Cache Classes Azure Devops gmail.com.
Hmm.
You can take two users. Means admin can perform only admin can access to only users and actually here.
Sorry, can you come again with the question? I'm sorry, I didn't follow
Ac-
that.
Actually, please go ahead just back.
I'm sorry. Can you come again into the diagram?
Yes, please. Please
Okay,
zoom it. Actually, you open Classes Azure Devops gmail.com is an admin.
correct.
You can access to the users entirely depend upon the admin actually.
Okay.
Without any
Hmm.
permission of admin, the users cannot do anything. I think here.
Without any permissions of the admin, the users cannot do anything. Not entirely true. The admin
Okay,
goes ahead, gives the roles to the users, and depending upon the role to the user can
okay.
perform things on the cloud. So each
Okay,
and
it
every
means
user will have a particular role out here as such.
it is based on that RBAC. I think.
Correct. The based upon the
Okay. Thank you.
yes. Any more questions here, guys?
Hello, sir.
Sir.
Go ahead, please.
What actually this page is now we are showing on the screen?
Okay, I'm sorry. Your voice is a little distant.
What actually
Okay.
this page is, sir? These diagrams are showing now. Why? For what purpose we can use this page?
Which page you're talking about?
Now which is showing on the screen.
This one that's showing on
This,
the screen. This is this
yeah.
is my this is a drawing board. I'm just using it for demonstrating things to you.
Okay.
Kiran, if I
Go ahead,
want to
please.
move existing company to the Azure portal,
Okay.
so same domain can I use or I have to create the new domain name?
You can use the same domain. It shouldn't be a problem. You can use the same domain out here.
హలో
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
సార్ నేను తెలుగులో మాట్లాడతాను సార్. ఇప్పుడు అజూర్ డెవాప్స్ @gmail.com అనేది ఒక ఈమెయిల్ అడ్రస్ మీద వన్ టెనెంట్ తీసుకున్నాం సార్. హలో,
Hmm.
అది తీసుకున్న తర్వాత మన సబ్స్క్రిప్షన్ మీద అజూర్ డెవాప్స్ అనే అడ్మిన్ ని మనం క్రియేట్ చేసి దాని తర్వాత డెమో 1 అనే సబ్ డొమైన్ ని మనం క్రియేట్ చేసాం, అంతే కదా సార్?
So demo one is not a subdomain. Demo one is a user. Like classes Azure DevOps is a user. Like this account is a user, right? Just classes Azure DevOps at the gmail.com. In the same way, demo one is another user, which means that if I want, let's say if I want you to have access to my Azure tenant, let's say you're doing some practice, you want my access to my Azure tenant, I need to add your account inside my Active Directory. That's what we did. So it's not a domain, it's an actual user, like you, like me.
ఓకే 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 సార్.
Kiran, how do we share the subscriptions?
We don't share subscriptions. We rather add roles onto a subscription. Once you add a role to a subscription, right? I, as a user, will be able to go ahead, look into your subscription or look into the same subscription out there, which we'll talk about. Like how do you add a role and all these things out here.
You told that the first day itself don't create the subscriptions and all.
Correct.
So you can share with friends and all.
Can you, sorry? I'm sorry. Can you come again,
No, in
please?
the first day itself don't create the subscriptions. So it will be valid only for 30 days.
Yes, that's correct.
So in that
So I would,
scenario, how do we do?
in this scenario, don't create a subscription right away. Please create a subscription tomorrow. Start from tomorrow. Please create a subscription tomorrow out here and be valid for the first 30 days. And after the 30 days, you can go ahead create a new subscription using a new card out here as such.
Like
Hello.
under one tenant, only one Active Directory, right? Like for one organization, one Active Directory.
Correct.
What's how the hierarchy, Kiran? Like, top is the tenant. Under tenant, there will be a active directory, and parallelly under tenant, there will be multiple subscriptions. How the hierarchy will be?
The hierarchy is this: tenant is nothing but your active directory only. So I'm calling tenant and active directory interchangeably. Under
Okay,
one
okay.
directory or under one tenant, you can have multiple subscriptions.
So tenant and active directory is both same.
Kind of, yes. You can say yes, kind of both. Yes.
Okay,
Hello.
thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
So actually, so this is my first class. Okay. So I got the this thing last two. I guess this is the third class, right?
Yes, this is the third class, correct.
Okay. So I got the last two classes no, link. So I will
Okay.
be going through it. So I am a non-IT background.
Okay.
So I might be having a lot of small doubts and big doubts. I'll be having a lot of confusion. So how do I connect with this or because I can't put everything on the mail, right?
See, the expectation here is to put everything on the email, because when you
Okay.
start working in an organization tomorrow, right, email will be a primary communication mode. So you
Right.
cannot, let's say, basically send out messages and all, right? So email will be a primary communication mode. And in case, let's say, you have an issue with putting everything on the email, please let
Okay.
me know on the email that you know what you need sometime. I'll send you a link. You can join in that link, and we can connect over, let's say, this particular application and discuss on that.
Oh, okay. So no problem. So I'll go through the last two classes and I'll let you know. So
Sure. So if anyone has a question, please send out an email and please write it down, and please use this one called classes Azure Devops @gmail.com. You can write it down and send across emails to this particular ID, and I'll respond back within a couple of hours. Okay, so that's it from my end today, guys. I am a little top of the hour, so I'll park questions and I'll take more questions tomorrow. And from tomorrow's session, we'll see users, user addition, and all these things out here. Okay. Thanks, guys, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.